Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Out of the Fishbowl. My name is BrettFish, and it is almost 7 a.m. And this podcast is meant to be recorded and edited and uploaded and set loose on the public by 10 a.m. of this same day. And I'm not an expert in the international standards of online podcasting, but I can assume that most podcasts probably aren't being recorded about 3 hours before they go live. And there are some reasons for that. And actually, I sent out a disclaimer last night saying that this episode wouldn't happen in time and apologizing for that. But then this morning I got up and I'm doing a bit of a running challenge, or in my case, a run walking challenge called February Run 2022, which was started by my friend Robin Porteous on the Twitterer, Porteous or Portois. And basically, the idea is you run 4Ks or more every day. And as I said, in my case, you run/walk 4Ks a day. And this morning I managed to get up at around 5 and I was out the door at 5:15, and my feet have been quite sore. I got new shoes this last week because my feet were hurting and they still are not kind of back to normal. So the running has been quite tough. And yesterday was mostly just a walk, just take it easy, just trying to ease the pain in the feet. And so I wasn't expecting much as I headed out this morning. But then as I left, I decided to just go for it and just see what was in the tank, what I could do. And before I knew it, I was at the halfway mark, or what I call the halfway mark, but it's 2.7 Ks. It makes the second half feel a lot faster. And I had only walked once and then kind of once just before that mark. So only walked twice leading up to the halfway mark. And that was probably the best I'd ever done. And so suddenly it felt like, oh, this is the one. I can beat my record. If I can just push once more to the end, maybe only walk one more time, then maybe I can beat my record. And my record up to that time was just under 30 minutes, which is not breaking any records or causing any concern in the running community or anything like that. And so I managed to run all the way to the end. I didn't have to walk again. And I managed to break 6 minutes a K, which, again, I'm not a runner, so I don't know what that means. But my younger sister, who is a trail runner and has done the comrades and does know what those things mean. Hello, Dawn. She seemed to think it was pretty epic. And probably pretty epic for me in brackets. And so I'm going to take that. And so I made it back and I showered and I thought, wow, if I can do that, who knows? Maybe we can record, edit, upload, advertise a podcast in 3 hours. And so here we are. And before I get to the actual episode, the reasons that I'm sitting 3 hours before podcast launch without a podcast, one of those reasons is that a couple of months ago, I was approached by a young woman named Marshall from the Philippines who offered to edit my podcast for free as part of making her showreel. And she's been doing that. And the first 4 episodes she edited and they were amazing. And she was making pictures and advertising and things like that, just doing a really phenomenal job. And then maybe a month ago, or just a bit longer than that, he sent me photos and a bit of video of how a hurricane had taken down her village or her town in the Philippines, like just rampant destruction. And she said that her house was okay, her house hadn't been damaged, but the main concern was internet and connectivity and all that kind of thing. And then I haven't heard from her since then, so I've been quite concerned. I only have her email and her phone number, and I've reached out a number of times and just haven't heard anything. So really hoping it's just connection stuff, and really hoping that she's not sitting there in the middle of a devastated village, worried that she's not editing my podcast. Because an edited podcast in that context is really the very least important thing. And so I do hope she's okay, and I hope there's a time when Marshall is listening to this episode. Hey, Marshall. And yeah, what that has meant is that I've had to pick up editing my own podcast again, and I don't really have the skills, I don't have the equipment, and so here we are, just doing the best we can. Super grateful for anyone who decides to tune in and listen and share this with friends and all that kind of thing. And we're going to see if we can record and edit and have this out for you by 10 a.m. this morning. And maybe the last thing about that is just an encouragement to those of you that are listening. This is the 13th episode that I've made. It's season 2. And there's been some super amazing feedback. People have really, for the most part, been challenged or inspired or found something helpful or some helpful things in most, if not all, of the episodes that I've put out. And so I want to encourage you, if that is you, to really please help me in terms of sharing this, getting it in front of people, subscribing if you haven't yet, or writing an online review because that puts it in front of other people's eyes and stuff. And it can be disheartening sometimes, creating something that people are saying is really good, but isn't kind of getting the kind of coverage it needs. And so let's work together at connecting the people we care about with this message, if it's a helpful one. I think today is going to be particularly significant. And I think the theme of today is going to be relevant to people that maybe don't normally listen. So as you're listening to today's episode, think of somebody that this would apply to who thinks they're not in the business of mentoring, because that's what we're going to be talking about today, and send this to them as an encouragement or an invitation to listen to it. Maybe they are mentoring and they don't realize it. Or maybe there's some mentoring that they could be doing that's going to be really easy for them to step into. And this might just be the prod or the nudge they need to do it. So I want to encourage you to please help me in sharing this out. And as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about mentoring. And when you hear the word mentor, I imagine that for most people that listen to this, when you hear mentor, you think about yourself. You think about who mentored me. I didn't have a mentor, or these are the people that stand out. These are the ones who mentored me. And I imagine it's probably a smaller group of people that when they hear the word mentor, immediately think about the people that they are mentoring. And so for me, I'm thinking of Asher. Shout out to Asher. And that is an intentional relationship where he came to me and said, will you mentor me, as part of a program that he's doing called SJLA, the St. John's Leadership Academy. And so each student needs a mentor. He approached me. I am mentoring him officially. And yet there are a number of other relationships where I'm mentoring people unofficially. Some of them may not even know they're being mentored. And I think that is one of the key things that we're going to touch on, that there's a blind spot where many of us, I would say probably all of us, are being mentored, but not necessarily in a way that we are aware of. And most of us are probably mentoring people in ways that we might not be aware of. And so mentoring is happening, sometimes blatantly, sometimes officially, sometimes intentionally. But I think it's also happening in the background in ways that we don't know about. And so I want you to think about this. If you reflect on your life, who are the names and the voices or the faces that come to mind when you consider the positive influences in your life? And for many of us, that can be something that happens at one time. It could be something that happened on a camp or at a conference. It could be a moment or a meeting when somebody pulled you aside, or you had this big conversation with someone and something just clicked. Some little piece of knowledge, some piece of wisdom, something just turned in your head and it changed the way you thought about something. It affected the way you saw yourself. It inspired you to try something that you hadn't tried before. And then there may also be kind of longer term relationships that we have with people where it's more of a consistent mentoring. So it can be a one-time thing, it can be an ongoing thing. Who are the names and faces and voices that come to mind when you consider the positive influences in your life? Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a colleague, pastor, an actual parent, family friend. Who are those people? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. And when I was looking for quotes, I like to start each episode with the quotes on the internet. I found a bunch, and none of them really kind of captured the heart of what I want to speak on. And some of them within the quotes contain what I think is some of the problematic stuff about mentoring. But I'll share with you some of the ones that I found. The first one was a guy called Simon Sinek, who said, a mentor is not someone who walks ahead of you to show you how they did it. A mentor walks alongside you to show you what you can do. And then a guy called Sean Hitchcock said, a mentor empowers a person to see a possible future and believe it can be obtained. So there's that thing about hope, about possibility. The third quote, a good mentor teaches you how to think, not what to think. And then the one that came closest, I think, to being what I thought was a good quote about mentoring, but still contains some problems, came actually from Steven Spielberg, movie director, who said this: the delicate balance of mentoring someone is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves. Let me read that again. The delicate balance of mentoring someone is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves. And I think the problem I have with each of those definitions is that there's a bit of a power thing in each one of them, a one-sided thing of the mentor is someone who shows you what you can do. They empower you to do this. They teach you what to think. They give you the opportunity to create themselves. It's very one-sided. All the power lies with the mentor. And when I look at mentoring, as we're going to discuss now, I see it very much as a two-way thing. And that's what I've decided to call this episode
Episode 6, That's not what I meant. Or
I mentioned that I'm mentoring a young guy called Asher, who's an amazing young guy. And as I told him that I was doing this episode, I was like, Asher, give me some thoughts. What can I say to the people about mentoring? And these are the things that just immediately came to his mind. He didn't even have to think about them. He said, modeling what you advise. He said, companionship. He said, journeying to support and not necessarily fix. And he said, listening. And I think maybe I should have just handed the mic over to Asher and let him do the whole podcast. And I think even just reading through that list, there's maybe a bit of challenge to me in the way that I'm mentoring him and being able to go, oh, okay, I need to listen to what he's saying. There's some learning here for sure. Modeling what you advise, companionship, journeying to support and not necessarily fix, and listening. There's a lot of gold there. And so we're going to look at two main aspects when it comes to mentoring, and very simply, who mentored you and who are you mentoring? And then we'll maybe touch on a few other aspects. But in this question and idea of who mentored you, you might sit there and you might think, well, nobody mentored me. There were a few people I asked to mentor me. There were people I wanted to mentor me, but the ones I wanted were always too busy. And I think that's often the case. We see some superstars in and around our lives, and we think that's the person I want mentoring me. But because they are those people, everybody wants them to be mentoring them. And they're probably so super busy doing the things they do anyway that they might not be able to have capacity to mentor anyone or many people officially in any way. And so we tend not to look at other people that might have been amazing people to mentor us because they weren't those key highlight people. And so you may sit there going, well, I wasn't officially mentored. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have mentors. But I want to suggest that each of us is being mentored all the time through the books that we read. So maybe it's the authors of the books that we're reading, through the movies we watch, the series we watch. There's a mentoring that is going on in those places. Those of us that play video games, computer games, often in those, there are things like violence, language. Many of the older games had disrespect to women, the way women are viewed and portrayed. Many of the older games, there's probably many of the present games doing that as well. I'm not really a huge gamer. But there's a mentoring that's happening. If you're playing those games and you're constantly surrounded by those things, then you are being taught, you are being trained, you are being encouraged, you are being inspired to be like that, to do that. And in the music that we listen to and in the musicians we watch, the lifestyles of Hollywood personas, actors and sports stars and musicians, in the way that they live, the people that we follow, the people that we are obsessed by, we look at them, we start dressing like them, we start following their behavior in certain ways. We are being mentored by people all the time. The leaders, if we're part of a church, maybe it's the pastor. If we're part of a business, maybe it's our boss, or maybe it's the CEO or some of the other leaders. If we're in school, it's prefects or teachers or people that we respect. It might be people that make life hard for us. They are mentoring us in a variety of ways. When I was in America, I remember reading a book, and this guy was speaking about how he was mentored by people in the Bible. So he was a follower of Jesus, and as he read the Bible, through the characters of the Bible, through the lives they lived, through the ways they spoke, through the things they did, he said that he was being mentored by David and by Jonah and by Jesus and by Peter. And I remember that my best friend Rob, who died of cancer a few years ago, many years ago now actually, he used to say this thing about me where he'd compare me to Paul in the Bible. He'd say, you are like Paul in the Bible. And that feels like a great compliment. Paul wrote half of the New Testament. He was one of the leading players in the Bible. And Rob would always follow it up by saying, you remind me of Paul, passionate yet tactless. And I can't fault him too much. I think often when I've read the Bible, I've kind of compared myself a lot more to Peter, who is very similar. Somebody who always just jumps in and then kind of his brain catches up a little bit later. So jumps in with his mouth or his actions, quick to act, quick to run in and follow his passions, and then realizes later that maybe there was a better approach or a more mature or sensible approach or whatever. And so as the Bible is something that has played an active role in my life, I have been mentored by people in the Bible, and particularly Jesus. Jesus is somebody that I've invited to be a mentor in my life. I want to live like him. I want to have the kind of attitude that he had. I want to be somebody who looked out for the least and the lost and the marginalized and those pushed to the edges. And so I find somebody that lived that way and I go, show me, Jesus, show me how I can live that way. Show me how I can be somebody that cares about those that society doesn't care for. And so through all these things, books, movies, games, music, characters that we read about a lot, we are being mentored. We are being taught to live in ways that we either look at and we go, that's cool, I'm going to live like that. And sometimes it might be, yo, I must definitely not do that. There's an example that I really shouldn't be following. That's something that I should avoid. And so each of us has been mentored. I think that is the point. And I think we need to be aware of who is mentoring us. Who are we inviting to be the voices in our lives? And I've spoken before about this, that one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the last 10 years was to invite a diversity of voices into my life. And so particularly in the books that I read, but also in podcasts I listen to and in entertainment and music and things like that. How do I get a variety and a diversity of voices that are going to shape me in a different way than if I was just listening to and watching white people? And I think this is important as well, that as you look at the voices that shape you, that encourage you, that speak into your life, are you aware of them? Are you aware of how closely you're listening to them? Are you aware of how much you take the advertising on board in a sense? I think most of us believe that advertising doesn't have any effect on us, and yet studies have shown again and again and again that advertising affects how we think and how we act. And so when that advertising is how to live, how to speak, how to treat women, what it means to be a real man, we watch movies about, inverted commas, real men, and we think that's what real men are. And that's often disrespectful. It's often violent to women. It's often focused on who the man is. It's often these messed up ideas of masculinity and power and things like that. And if those are the things that we keep on watching, we keep on consuming, we keep on taking in, then those are the lessons that we are going to take on. Unless we are inviting lessons that contradict those, lessons that speak more strongly against those things in terms of helping us be the people we want to be. And so it's helpful to take some time to reflect on who mentored you. And you might even want to hit pause now and sit with a piece of paper and write down names of people who mentored you. Maybe somebody who mentored you was James Bond. And maybe a guy who is known for killing people, for drinking, for sleeping with every woman he meets, maybe that's not the best mentor to have in your life. Maybe some of the people that have mentored you are the gangsters that you've watched in TV or serial killers that you've watched in different series, things like that. And so maybe it's helpful to sit down and look at those and particularly try and ascertain who are the positive voices, who has mentored you in good ways, in ways that are acceptable, ways that you look back and are grateful on. And those might be real people, they might be fictitious people or characters, but I think it's helpful to know we are mentored. We're being mentored on a daily basis. And then with that in mind, we come to the second part, which is who are you mentoring? And you might sit there and go, well, I'm not mentoring anyone. And maybe when I've spoken about who are you mentored by, you're sitting there going, okay, clearly I am mentoring people already. But maybe you don't really believe it. Maybe you don't really think that your life is influencing other people because you haven't ever said to somebody, hey, can I mentor you? Or because nobody ever phoned you and said, hey, will you be my mentor? So you think, well, I'm not mentoring anyone. But I want to suggest that if you're a team leader at work, if you are a youth leader, if you are a sports captain, a prefect, any of those things, if you have any kind of authority over somebody else, if you have any kind of influence over someone, if you're a parent, you are mentoring, whether you want to or not, whether you are intentional about it, whether you've chosen it or not. If you are a friend to people, you are mentoring. And so this mentoring thing can happen in an official capacity or it can happen unofficially. And so it can be sports, it could be business, it could be couples in relationship, things like that. Like we are mentoring people around us. And the hope of this episode is that you will be more intentional. Maybe you are someone who's mentoring 15, 20 people already. And then the purpose of this episode is not to tell you to take on more people. But if you are someone who's not actively, intentionally mentoring anyone, then the hope of this episode is that within a week, within 2 weeks, within a month, you'll be actively mentoring 2 people. And I think 2 people, each of us have the capacity for in some way. And you can do more than that. But I think 2 people is a good way, especially if you're not someone that has thought of yourself as a mentor, if you've not been actively doing it before. 2 is a good number to start with. And so I want you to start looking around and thinking, who is someone I could mentor? And then with that, the idea of mentoring, I think, is quite scary to a lot of people. And I want to break it down that mentoring is a spectrum that can start with something as simple as having a milkshake with somebody once a month and can move to as hectic as being part of an official program where you need a mentor and you've got some rules and guidelines about how it works and how often you meet and what you discuss when you get together. Mentoring is anywhere on that spectrum. And so it could be that you invite someone, you picture someone in your life. Generally, it will be someone younger. It can be someone older. It can be someone in the same age group. But maybe there's someone younger than you that you can say, hey, would you like to go out for a coffee or a milkshake? Would you like to go out for a walk? And have a conversation with them. And then there might be a time when you say, hey, would you like to be mentored? Would you like us to meet like this once a month? I think ideal mentoring, if you've got capacity at some stage, is once a week. Just connecting with someone. That could be a WhatsApp, it could be a video call, it could be something shorter, and then once a month you actually physically meet up. But within that time, there's a time of touching base and just checking in with someone and seeing how they're doing. And it doesn't have to be hectic and official or anything. It can simply be you take someone for a milkshake and you say, tell me about your life, what's going on? And depending on how comfortable they are with you might get to a point of saying, what are you struggling with at the moment? What are you finding challenging? What is difficult? What is painful? And the more time you spend with someone, likely the deeper you're going to go. And so maybe you just have milkshakes with someone for a year and it's just tell me about your week. And maybe in the second year, you get to how are you doing? What are you struggling with? What are you really wanting to change in your life? What are you really wanting to add in your life? And what is beautiful about a mentoring relationship is there's no kind of set way of doing it. It can be you meet up for a hike once a month and you just chat and you just connect. Connection is probably what I'd say is the one thing that is essential in a mentoring relationship. There's some kind of intentional connection, and then beyond that, it can be a variety of things. One of my best mentoring relationships was when I was in Stellenbosch. I was working at a church there, and a young guy called Dylan came and started meeting with me. I don't even remember how it began because he wasn't a Christian, and I don't know if he was maybe coming to the church for some reason. But we connected, and so we started meeting once a week at I think 7 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning for breakfast at a local restaurant. And literally, I think at the start it would literally be, "How was your week?" We sit and chat, we have breakfast together, and we go. At some point, we started reading books together, and so if it was a Christian book, it would be a chapter a week. If it was a Bible book, it would be a chapter a week. And so we might go through the book of Romans, and he would read a chapter, and I'd read a chapter, and we'd come together and say, what is one thing you got out of that chapter? What is one thing you found confusing? What is a question you have? What challenged you? And what was amazing about that particular relationship, and this is the one point I want to make, and I want to invite people that are actively mentoring, and I want to invite you as you think about mentoring people to focus on this point. When I met with Dylan, when we started reading a chapter of Romans every week, I was sharing with him from a book that I'd read countless times. Having grown up in the church, having grown up reading the Bible, I'd read that chapter 50 times. And so he's getting information, insight, extra knowledge, all of that from somebody who had read the chapter 50 times. And in return, what I was getting was somebody who was reading this chapter with fresh eyes. Somebody who'd never read Romans before, first time reading, these are my thoughts. They're fresh. They're not biased. They're not influenced by anything else except for his lived experience. And so there was a richness of mutual mentoring happening in that space. I was adding some stuff to Dylan's life, and he was definitely adding some stuff to my life. As a mentoring relationship, what I took out from it was that this idea of me doing all the mentoring was not helpful, not true, and it was about me going into those spaces, willing to learn and listen and see what Dylan had to offer me. And so for most mentoring relationships, I really see them as a two-way thing. I think that if you go in thinking you have all the knowledge and all the answers and all the experience and all that, then I think you're going to miss something. And I think there's an opportunity for us to learn from a different life experience. Like anyone you mentor is never going to have lived the exact same life experience you have. And so there's always opportunity to see something from a different angle or perspective, or just hear something with fresh ears. And so as you either step into new mentoring relationships or as you go back to those that you're already part of, I want you to think about that. What do I have to learn in this? Even though I might be predominantly in this so that I can help someone, so that I can give to them, so I can walk alongside them. If you think about those quotes that I read at the beginning of this episode, that the power in them, the dynamic was all one way, from the mentor to the mentee. What happens if we start to change our mindset on that and we head into the relationship as a mentee, as a fellow co-creator? I love that word, a co-learner, a co-experiencer. And so I think there's a lot that we can take out of that. And when I spoke about this thing, it can be as easy as a milkshake. It can be as intentional as we do a program together. We officially meet. We set some boundaries. We set some ideas of what we want it to be. Some other thoughts to think about are just that mentoring can take place with such a range. It can be in a sports relationship. It can be someone on your sports team. It can be a business partner. Maybe you could mentor someone in the use of Excel spreadsheets. You could mentor someone in the use of social media. It can have a very specific focus that isn't about being necessarily inspired or motivated or whatever. It can have a very, very focused focus. So you could mentor someone using a skill that you have that they don't have, using an experience that you have that they don't have, using knowledge you have that they don't have. And it could be for a short time. You might say, let's do a 6-month meeting together. And at the end of it, we'll evaluate. If we feel like it's done, we can move on. And maybe both of us then go and find another 6-month relationship. And we will mentor those people. And after those 6 months, we will each break up and suddenly 4 people are being mentored. And what I like with the idea of mentoring is that it should create that momentum. I mentor 2 people. Part of my mentoring will always be encouraging those 2 people to be mentoring 2 people. And if they're mentoring 2 people, part of their focus will be getting those 2 people to, and so on and so on. And so if each of us start mentoring 2 people in that way, eventually the whole world should be being mentored, unless we are all mentoring the same people. One example that comes to mind, I think of a friend of ours from the States, is that she was being mentored and she was living by herself and was spending a lot of money on takeout just because she'd never been taught to cook. And so she was in debt because she was buying food all the time, or she was buying takeout all the time, meals all the time. And one of the ways that she was mentored was a couple walked along with her and they helped her get out of her credit card debt, but then they just helped her to start making meals at home. And that might seem like such a bizarre thing. It's like, well, that's something easy. I could teach someone how to cook. And it's that idea of the matrix vibe, like unless you or until you know, you don't know. And so if you are someone that's lived at home and had all your meals made for you, and suddenly you're out of the house, you're living by yourself, if you have never learned how to cook, then the likelihood is you're going to be living on takeout, which is firstly not healthy for you. Secondly, it's expensive. And so a way to be mentored in that space is for somebody to just come alongside you and teach you how to make simple meals. So as we start to think about these things, our minds can be blown and enlarged at just what could mentoring be. Maybe it's teaching someone how to fix a car. Maybe it's teaching somebody how to use TikTok, in which case the younger people can mentor the older people. All that kind of thing. It can really be anything. It can go anywhere. Is it intentional? Is it a relationship that both of you have signed up for in some sense? You've both agreed, hey, let's meet in this way at this time and let's be intentional about connecting with each other. And then lastly, just before I finish, I want to just take a look at my country, South Africa. South Africa has a huge problem of fatherlessness. And I'm part of an organization called Heartlines. And our program this year, our big program that we're pushing is called Fathers Matter. And so if you've got a group of men that want to come together and do, I think it's a 5-week program, and just sit and look at this thing of being a father, then get hold of me, get hold of Heartlines, and invite us to come in and just lead you in that space. It is an amazing space where people are looking at their own journeys with their fathers and then looking at the people they're fathering. And one of the things I really liked in that whole concept was this idea of what is called a social father. So I don't have my own children, and I probably won't ever have my own children. And so it looks like I'm excluded from being a father. But then you have this idea that we call social fathers, which is people that you are fathering that are not your biological children, and fathering, mentoring, or whatever. Where are the people where you are filling in the gaps, especially where there's fatherlessness? Maybe a father has died, maybe a father is absent, maybe it's a single mother. And there are certain things that men can bring into the situation that a father can bring, especially when it comes to young guys. And so this idea of how do we become social fathers, and the concept spreads across social mothers as well as a thing. We're not wanting to be sexist here, I think, because the gap exists predominantly with men in this country that I want to focus there. But this is something that can be adapted. And mentoring needs to happen with men and women across the board for sure. And I do think, and I would suggest, there might be exceptions to this, but I would suggest that generally men mentoring younger men is a good thing, woman to woman. But the way I've always thought about it and seen it, that seems to make a lot of sense because some of the complications that can come in if we do it differently. But I found that really helpful is typically mentoring younger guys. And so hopefully that's just given us some thoughts that there's this blind spot of where are we being mentored, where we're not even thinking about it. What are the things that we allow into our life? And do some of those things need to change? Are we being mentored by violence? And is that affecting our mood? And if you don't think it's affecting your mood, then listen to an hour of classical music and go driving. listen to an hour of heavy metal and go driving, and come and tell me about your driving experience afterwards. Music affects us. Movies and series, violent video games, these things affect us. And so sometimes we have to go look at the things and the people that are mentoring us, and we've got to ask the question, do I want these to be my primary mentors? Do I want these to be mentors at all? And in some cases, there might be some things we cut out. In some cases, there might be some things we reduce, and there might be some things where we go, well, I need to add this to my life, to fill this gap or this space. I need to ask somebody to intentionally mentor me. And in that, I want to encourage you, like, don't just go for the popular people, for the people that it's naturally assumed will be good mentors. There are a lot of older folks in particular who have walked a journey, who have a story, who may be all too happy to sit and talk with you once a week, and they might not be the people you think of naturally. And so spend some time thinking of the people in your life. And think of what you might add to someone else's life. Maybe it's an older person in an old age home who's living by themselves. And you invite them into a relationship with you once a month, once a week, and you say, hey, I'd love to sit with you. I'd love to just hear your story. I'd love to hear how you dealt with debt. I'd love to hear how you dealt with relationships. Things like that. You might be positively surprised by some of the stuff that comes out in that. And then lastly, before I close, I just want us to take time to stop and thank the people that have mentored us. If there are people that we know have intentionally walked alongside us, and maybe even unintentionally. Maybe there's a teacher that had such a deep and profound effect on you, but you never thanked them. And maybe there's a way for you to go and track them down and say, hey, that moment in grade 9 when you stopped the class and you spoke to us about living out our potential or whatever it was, that camp I was on when you were the camp speaker and you spoke that thing and it helped me to see life completely different. That time you sat with me and my girlfriend and you spoke to us in our relationship and you really just said something that clicked and you helped me to treat her better. Let's go back and thank people that have mentored us intentionally or unintentionally. People that have said stuff, people that have walked a road or a journey, people that have done things that have profoundly affected us. Let's make sure that they know about it. And it might be something from 20 years ago and it might feel really weird, but I can tell you almost as a guarantee that when somebody comes to you and says, hey, thank you, you did something that really affected me positively, I just want to say thank you. That is very seldomly going to go badly. And it might change the person's life. There are people that mentor people all the time and just never hear about it. And they might think that their life's been useless. They might think they've been a waste of time. They might be struggling at the moment with meaning and purpose. And for you to just go to them and say, hey, you did this thing when I was really lonely. You paid attention to me. You invited me into the band. You gave me attention. You spent time having milkshakes with me once a month, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I just want to say thank you. And so take some time to really thank the people that have mentored you. And so even though this quote is not absolutely perfect, Steven Spielberg reminds us that the delicate balance of mentoring someone is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves. We don't mentor people to change them, to fix them. As Asher said, we are journeying to support and not necessarily fix. It's about companionship. It's about listening. That's one of the key things. And then Asher also mentioned modeling what you advise. Live out the stuff that you try and get your mentees to do, because that is going to be your strongest mentoring tool. Is, do they see you doing the stuff? Do they see you living out what you are telling them they should be doing? So let's thank the people, but let's be intentional. If you are not actively mentoring anyone today, I want you to start thinking of names. I want you to see in the spaces where you're at, and then just ask somebody. Don't maybe go to someone directly and say, hey, I want to mentor you, but say, hey, would you like to have a milkshake? Could I take you out for coffee? And in that conversation, you could say, hey, this is what I've been thinking. I'd really like to mentor someone. What if we did this once a month? Start with something very simple. And if the connection is natural, if the connection is real, you can make it more intentional. You can make it more specific. You can let the person that you're mentoring decide what they need and what they want. You can decide if you want to work through a book together. You can decide if you just want to catch up. You can decide if you want to talk about challenges or opportunities or positive things or whatever it is. There's no blueprint. Let's go mentor people. Let's be mentors. Let's be aware of who's mentoring us. But let's be intentional about pouring into other people, about walking alongside other people, about even just buying someone a milkshake. My name is BrettFish. Thanks for listening to Out of the Fishbowl. Go and tell someone. If you like this episode, tag somebody, subscribe, write a review. Let's get this in front of people. Thanks, everybody.